Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. Uh, you know, in these podcasts, I've been doing a fair amount about current events and what's going on in the world and internationally, politics, and all that. I'm getting tired of it. Tell you the truth, it's not really my interest. My interest is in deep spiritual knowledge, and there's so much superstition that's crept into religions, all religions really, including Hinduism. But nevertheless, the deeper knowledge is there, and it's important. It's amazing how a lot of people are kind of rejecting religion for one reason or another. And really, I think what that's about is that, there's so much superstition and that has kind of twisted the whole thing. And it almost, to me, a lot of it almost reads like a grade B sci-fi movie. So it's important then not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, because that knowledge, the essence of that knowledge, and especially if you really see and understand more and more clearly the depth of it, which we can never totally do. It's vast, but the more we start to understand that, the more valuable it becomes, and the more useful it becomes. So anyway, that's really my main interest, because the technology of the unified field is there. We can purify the whole global consciousness with it. The rishis told us how. But why do we reject that? Largely, I think it's because people, again, reject spirituality in general because of all the superstition and distortions and misunderstandings and misinterpretations have crept in. Like I like to say, echoes of truth, perceived as truth, hold truth at bay. And so much of our viewpoints on spirituality is really just astral echoes of a deeper truth. And as many spiritual masters will tell you, that the astral realm is a vast and desertous wasteland. And a lot of the approaches to spirituality are really more just astral, So, okay, so having said that, I'm thinking about doing it, and I think I just have to do this. Mount Soma, and what's been going on at Mount Soma since we started it, and we bought this land, in 2002, but I've been thinking and feeling like this is something we have to do since, 1981, 82, something in there's when I first learned about the notion of an enlightened city and its power and influence to purify and, transform global consciousness, clean the fishbowl, But since we started building it, the whole process, it's just been so incredible. And really, so much incredible stuff. And it's subtle but profound. That's why I said in the blurb here that goes along with the title of the podcast, the deeper, the more subtle, the more profound, the more profound, the more powerful, the more elusive. Truth is elusive, yet the technology of it is real, and it's in the Veda, it's in the Vedic literature. And it's real, it's profound, it's life-changing, it's exquisite, it's divine. And there's such a huge need for it right now. But we just have to get over this hump of losing the forest for the trees, getting caught up in all the conflicts and different opinions and polarizing the influences of it all. There's something that's come out, a lot is coming out about electric cars. and about how they burst into flames. They spontaneously combust, the batteries, the lithium batteries, And I was talking to a really wonderful man, a dear friend, and he was saying, yeah, well, gas cars catch on fire too, And the thing is, they won't spontaneously combust in your garage in the middle of the night when you haven't been driving it for however many hours it is. There's a real problem there, He did say that they're working on improving the batteries so that doesn't happen. But a lot has to happen before that whole thing will work. Okay. So anyway, back to Mount Soma a little bit. I was thinking of writing a book, or it'd be great to make a movie or a novel or something like that. But I think I wouldn't even be able to do it as a factual documentary because I don't think people would believe it. To be really honest with you, before I went through all this and experienced it all, I wouldn't have believed it myself. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Not believable, beyond believability. But it's also, when you go through it like we have over these past years since we started construction in 2002, it's irrefutable. I mean, it's real. And we have people come here, people that know nothing about Mount Soma. We have Sunday drivers that just people bombing around. They end up driving through the development here. And they'll stop people. What's going on? Construction workers, people like that come up and say, this place, the feeling here is incredible. What is this place? That's literally true. And, but it goes so far beyond that. And I don't know. Honestly, in a way, I'm even hesitant to go into the details of it because the whole idea of the reality of mapping and the power of Vastu science, especially when you integrate it with this technology that we're building here that's so profound. So I don't know. What do you think, Scotty? I mean, part of me feels like maybe write a book, write a novel. A movie would be incredible. I talk sometimes about that movie Lost, which is about an island that these people end up on, and it's the laws of nature are different there. Of course, that's a Hollywood production, and it's very, very different than what I'm talking about here. But in another sense, the laws are different. The laws of nature, they do change, and the mechanics of what's going on is incredible to witness. So I don't know, Scotty, what should we do? I mean, write a book, write a novel.
Well, a lot of movies getting written out of novels, so.
Yeah, maybe I should even just make a line item thing of this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Just to get people a feeling for the incredible progression of things. So we'll see what happens with that, But I'll tell you, in the field of one thing I want to talk about today, with the James Webb Telescope, and it's really turned a lot of physics and astronomy and that, upside down. There's an article in nature.com. It's a recognized publication, and also there's an astronomy publication that's out. I think I talked about it in the last podcast. And so there's a lot it's coming up now. And in this nature.com article, you got to feel sorry for him, this scientist. And he gave 4 different reasons that just why the James Webb Telescope has proved the Big Bang Theory wrong. And I think his last sentence was really poignant, something to the effect of he's just realizing that what he has invested his whole life into, what he's spent his whole life on, has now turned out to be completely wrong. It's tragic, And the whole thing is so interesting. I'd like to talk about it a little bit and then relate it to Vedic knowledge, because that's a whole field. When we talk about Chaitanya, when we talk about Bhavati Tam, when we talk about, in other words, the transcendent, that's a field that even the deepest arenas of modern physics really has no real understanding of whatsoever. And what physicists will tell you is, well, we're just into the observable universe and what we can measure. And so the whole idea is that the Western approach to knowledge is looking outside of oneself and seeing what you can ascertain that way. And that's fine. That's a branch of the Veda. But there's this other whole different approach to gaining knowledge, which is about going inward and finding that place inside where you're one with everything. And then as the cobwebs clear more and more, that's where the cognitions come from. That's where the Vedic literature comes from, when the rishis did that with their such profoundly refined physiologies, you see. And that is really the future of humanity. That's the greatest frontier, and that's going to happen. But at any rate, talking about let's talk a little bit about the physics of the thing, just in a very simple conceptual way. Do you know that gravity affects time? Everything's called atomic clocks, and they're just extremely precise. And if you take an atomic clock and set it on the planet, gravity affects it. It affects the rate of time. So if you take the same atomic clock and put it way out in outer space where it's not under the influence of gravity, it progresses differently. It changes. The progression of time is different. That's remarkable, really. And it fits. You see, here's what happened. There's this thing that's called the field equation. They came up with this thing 100 years ago, but they got off on tangents with interpreting the field equation. And it really turned the thing all upside down. And that's where they came up with these ideas of Big Bang, black holes, and all that, which now with the advent of James Webb telescope, it's proven that, for that 100-year period, they were on the wrong track. Can you imagine how devastating that would be if you were a physicist and invested your life into that and you realize it's just a dead end? It was wrong. But see, it's not that the field equation is wrong. The field equation is correct, but it was interpreted wrongly. And a big part of why it was interpreted wrongly was because they assumed that subatomic particles like electrons had no dimension, no size whatsoever. So the size, in the equation, they put down the size as 0. And so then if you had something that was divided by the size of the thing you're talking about, they'd divide by 0, and they would come up with infinity. And because of that, then just by grinding out numbers with the field equation, they said, oh, see, there's a Big Bang, and oh, see, there are black holes. But the assumption was wrong. They may be extremely small. In fact, they are extremely small. But electrons do have some dimensionality. And if you take that into account, the whole Big Bang thing and everything just fell apart right there. And not to mention that when they look at the formulas, when they look at the James Webb telescope, there's your proof too. There are galaxies out there vastly older than the Big Bang says the universe is. And you might say, well, can't they just tweak the formula to account for that? Well, no, because the field equation is there. It's real. And the formula can't be tweaked in a way that says, oh, well, okay, maybe the universe is twice the size as it was. It just doesn't work like that, So the field equation, the amazing thing about it, and this gets very, really cool, but the field equation, you can derive from it. In other words, like contained within the umbrella of the field equation, you can pull out Maxwell's equations. So Maxwell's equations are the laws of electromagnetics. And basically our world, it's all electromagnetics. What the body's tissues are made of, how they function, that's all electromagnetics. Televisions, planets spinning in space, the room that we're in right now, it's all electromagnetic, And so you can pull that knowledge out. But if things start moving at really high velocities, fractions of the speed of light or the speed of light, then there's another thing. There's another, theory of relativity, right? And I explain that in a little more detail in my lectures. But the idea is that there's something called the Lorentz transformations, the Lorentz equations, and those things account for things moving at high fractions or fractions of the speed of light, significant fractions of the speed of light. Those two get pulled out of the field equation. Now, there's another thing, remarkably, that gets pulled out of the umbrella of the field equation is the theory of gravity. That's in there. That's in the field equation. General relativity is the idea that, space is curved, space-time, and then by virtue of that, they come up with these complicated formulas for space-time that kind of explain if you have something moving at the speed of light, but there's gravitational influence, what that influence is. But again, they got off track with that because really, you see, general relativity has to do with acceleration. And in physics, acceleration isn't just something speeding up or slowing down. It's also when something's moving around a corner. And you can get these formulas for general relativity, space-time, all that, and they do work, but it was a misinterpretation to think space and time are curved. The whole thing is wrong. Space is not curved. It just so happens that those formulas work, but they're kind of like, square root of -1, or in that whole field of complex variable analysis. It's virtual in a sense. Now, there's a really interesting thing, GPS, like the GPS that you have on your phone, the way that works is really incredible. And the guy that came up with this, back I think in like the 50s, before we had satellites, before we had so much of this technology. But he said that what's going to happen, eventually we're going to have satellites, which now we do, of course. And those satellites are going to be influenced by gravity. And he used this non-space-time curve thing to explain it based on the field equation, and it worked. At the time, it was like he even said, oh, well, we will come to understand this eventually when we have satellites and all. But we would not have GPS if it wasn't for those formulas for that interpretation, and it turns out to be valid. So it's really interesting that your GPS on your cell phone or whatever is only works because of the theory of relativity, which, of course, a guy named Poincaré came up with, a Frenchman, and somehow Einstein ended up, getting the reputation for it. But it's actually this French guy. Now, here's the thing. This whole consideration of the absolute, non-relative, non-physical. You see, the very idea that a particle can have zero dimension, it's not physical. It has to have some dimensionality, or it's not physical. And if it's not physical, it's an interesting thing, because what if you do divide by zero and you end up with something that's not physical, but it's transcendental? It's within the arena of Chaitanya. And the absolute, the transcendent, Bhavati Tum, all those different names apply. The one thing that is the source of everything. And experientially, God. Of course, we get into astral echoes of what God means, and then we can get off on, all sorts of different tangents, like we talked about, echoes of truth perceived as truth, hold truth at bay, kind of a thing. But the point is that the reality is there. Now, from the experience of viewing the absolute from the relative, it's basically, it's flat. It's no thingness, right? But it's a little bit like if you look through a camera lens, you know, and have projects it on ground glass, and then you see the tree in the distance on the back of your camera, but you can't grab that tree. It's a virtual image, right? Like that, there are worlds within the absolute, but from the perspective of the relative, they're virtual. And it's within, now here's the thing, within that, if you will, virtual perspective from the perspective of the relative, that's where you have these things like the pillar of light that goes off to infinity, that's in the Puranas, the Hiranyagarbha, the whole structure of relative existence, the universe. See, physicists are starting to realize now that this relative, it doesn't have a shape, it doesn't have a form, it goes on indefinitely. But from within the absolute, you see what it's called the cosmic egg, the thing that birthed relativity. It does have a shape, and it's a Hiranyagarbha, egg-shaped thing. But you see, that's so far beyond even the comprehension of physics right now. They're not even thinking that way. But there are things you can do. There's Maharishi Patanjali, from thousands of years ago, came up with these things called the Yoga Sutras. They're meditation techniques where you can do sanyama, the technique is called, and you can see the shape of the universe by doing sanyama, on the moon, for example. And what do you see? Hiranyagarbha. It's incredible, Now, here's another, it's also interesting. There's so much, but if the universe goes on forever, where's its center? Well, mathematicians even tell you, the best way to look at it is every point is equally the center. And it's can be experienced then that you can experience the Hiranyagarbha way out there, of which you're the center. And so every point in creation, you could say, is encapsulated, if you will, by this huge Hiranyagarbha that's the shape of the universe. But see, that's entering the transcendental realm from within your own consciousness. And the reality of it isn't in the relative, it's within the transcendent, within the absolute. Is that all making sense, Scotty?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, isn't it? I mean, I think it's just amazing, And
Sure.
and yeah. And now, from within the absolute and the whole structure of the Veda, they talk about the Upangas, the Vedangas, the Itihasas, all that, and I go into that in great depth. It's just incredible knowledge. But from the perspective of the absolute, that structure, that dynamic, the whole Vedic literature, Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Atharva Veda, Yajur Veda, all that, Upanishads, all that, that's what's real. And the relative is the illusion. It's called Maya. So from the perspective of the relative, it may look at the structures within the absolute as illusion, as virtual, but a deeper truth, the underlying basis, what things really boil down to is the absolute. That's why they call it absolute. And within that realm, viewing out into relativity, it's that's why they call it relativity, because it's not absolute. It's all just relative, it's illusion. All right. So anyway, here's another little cool thing. Cosmic rays. Cosmic rays are things in space that they radiate from really high energy sources like the sun or a supernova or whatever, and they're all over in outer space. We get protected by them by our atmosphere and that. But one of the astronauts went up in the International Space Station for a whole year. He was up there, and when he came back, see, the cosmic rays do a number on the physiology, and when he came back, his IQ had dropped by 20 points. And they don't know how to block it because it goes right through metal and things like that. So if we didn't figure out how to block the influence of the cosmic rays and send people to Mars, by the time they got there, they'd be vegetables, So that's just another thing that's got to get worked out before we start thinking about that, going to Mars. Another thing, nuclear power. They talk about solar power. They talk about wind power. And if you just really look into it, I mean, those technologies, first of all the batteries we have that are charged up by whatever, you know how long they can power the whole planet Earth? 76 seconds. So we are so far from, alternative energy sources to do without fossil fuels, But there is nuclear power. Now, a lot of people, we get afraid of nuclear power. Why? Because of Chernobyl and nuclear meltdowns and radiation fallout and all like that. And even the USSR, even when they were building that thing back in the 50s, they knew it was flawed. They knew, some of these scientists, it's even in the literature, you can find it, that the thing eventually there was going to be a meltdown, and they didn't have proper containment. The concrete walls around it and stuff were not sufficient to contain it. And sure enough, that happened, But the point is, nuclear power is not that way anymore. They can have nuclear power sources that will not melt down. They're very safe. And we could do that. But then you get into the problem of the nuclear waste. There's waste material, radioactive waste material there, has a half-life of, God, I don't know how long, 1 million years or whatever, a long time. And what do you do with it? People say, well, we can contain it in concrete vaults and bury it underground. Sooner or later, something's going to crack. I mean, we're talking 1 million years, Something's going to go wrong, and you're going to have all this radioactive released into the atmosphere. So that's not a really viable solution, though they're doing it. But now here's another thing about that. And this is, I think it's a solution, and there are things called these deep trenches. They go 7 miles deep into the earth. There's one, and they're in the oceans, There's one in the Pacific Ocean. It's called the Mariana Trench. It's 7 miles deep, and it's just off the coast away from Japan. And the thing is, it goes all the way beyond the crust of the planet into that molten core. And that molten core, I mean, why is that molten core molten? Because it's radioactive down there. There's nuclear reactions going on down there. And so if we took that waste and dumped it down into that molten core, first of all, the molten core moves very, very slowly. And so once it got consumed by that, and of course, constantly silt and everything is pouring down into those trenches, it'd get buried by that. But more importantly, it would enter that molten core. And that moves at the rate, how the continents migrate. Europe and the United States used to touch, and now they're far apart. That's how slowly this molten core moves. So you dump that stuff down into there, and it's going to be gone. By the time it ever did emerge, it would be, the half-life would have expired, and that stuff wouldn't even be radioactive anymore. But now, you see, people hear that. It's just, they hear that and they say, oh, we can't dump things in the ocean. We're going to pollute the oceans, And I'm not into polluting the oceans, but it's different. It's going to go right through the ocean, right under the crust, right into the molten core, and you're never going to see it again. And if and when it did resurface in 1 million years, after it mixed with the entire molten core, so it was really diluted out, it wouldn't be radioactive anymore anyway. So that's a conceivable, merits investigation, Also, another thing is that, people are kind of bashing religion. I mean, it's incredible. It's terrible, I would say, religion is a problem. We got to do without religion, do away with religion. It messes up people, makes them narrow-minded fanatics and stuff like that. Religion is not the problem. What's the problem is a superficial, superstitious understandings of religion. That's the problem. And we certainly see plenty of that in the world, don't we? Fanaticism in all its different forms. But the thing is, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Spiritual understanding, you're talking about the vessel that holds all fields of life, all fields of knowledge. And what we need to do then is purify our understanding of that, purify our understanding of Vedic literature, purify our understanding of the Veda, and contained within that are the technologies where we can heal this whole planet, clean the fishbowl, of life. If the fishbowl is polluted, which the global consciousness is clearly polluted, all the craziness that's going on in the world is evidence of that, You clean that, and then everything will be fine. People will get along. They'll stop behaving so ridiculously on a personal level, interpersonal level, international level. The whole thing is just nuts, And if you look, I was looking, I saw, I didn't watch the whole thing, but just a brief segment of the documentary, and they were talking about some of these spiritual movements. There was one in Oregon, and I've talked about another one in Houston, and how evidently they tend to draw educated people. And they had footage of these educated people doing these crazy things, and the whole thing was just completely nuts. And of course, that's what the stuff cults are made out of. And we all are familiar with all the crazy things that occur in these different cults. And again, we need to take a step back. We need to have a more mature relationship with it. And I would say that particularly when it comes to like Vedic knowledge, Hinduism and stuff, particularly in the West, it's new to the West. In India, they're onto it. And in India, a lot of the people in India know that on every street corner, there's another cult type thing going on, and magicians and all this stuff. They're past it. So many of them, that's hocus pocus, that's brainwashing, blah, blah, blah. And we're still learning that really in the West. In other words, we haven't really been able to separate the two, to distinguish between the two. And that's where we get into this, baby bathwater stuff. Okay. But that's all going to change. That's all going to change. Well, there's a whole bunch going on in the news. I have it in my notes to this podcast. So if you want to go to the blog, you can read them, but I almost don't even want to go through it anymore. I mean, I've got it in seed form in my notes. We've had, obviously crazy times throughout thousands of years. So wars, people killing each other, all kinds of terrible things. I don't know if we've ever had a time, I don't believe we have, where everywhere you look, perspectives are just nuts. The whole thing is just nuts. I just stopped. My notes there, different crazy things that are going on. I just stopped doing it. I'll probably continue from time to time in the podcast, but by and large, it's just, you can find it on your own. It's in the news if you want to look. But so many people are focused on like one little channel that they watch or one little website that they listen to. It's not going to do it for you. You're going to get a slanted perspective. But if you're willing to take the time, that's how I generate these things. Is I spend a lot of time. I feel like it's my obligation to know what's going on with the world. That's what I do. That's my concern, is the world, And I've always been that way. I remember even when I was a little kid, my older brother, you weight of the world, you carry the weight of the world, But how can one not, the suffering, the horrible stuff that's going on, especially when there's a technology to reverse it, Anyway, so you can, read through my notes if you'd like, and it kind of gives an overview of a lot of the stuff that's going on. We've never seen it this crazy. Why? Because now this is the phase transition that I've been talking about, where the laws of nature change over time. That's called the yugas in Vedic literature. And we're at a transition point here, and it's been identified many, many different ways in Vedic literature and other places. We are in the transition point. And so we're going to transition from what's called the age of ignorance, Kali Yuga, to a brief period, but it's 1,000 years or whatever, but a period of Sat Yuga, age of knowledge, age of purity. And that transition can happen easily, or it can happen very painfully. That's called Armageddon. I think enough has been done that I don't think we're going to see an Armageddon, but just watch the news and you'll see that things are painful now. There are difficulties in the world. And the more we do, the more conscious we are about about facilitating the transformation from Kali Yuga into Sat Yuga smoothly, the better. And that's really what we're about here. Sat Yuga is going to happen. It's just like the sun rises, it's set, and then the sun sets, period. Okay? And the period of Sat Yuga is coming. It's just the question is, how difficult is the transition going to be? And really, in a nutshell, that's what we're doing here at Mount Soma. We're bringing about that transition as smoothly as possible. And the more we can do to complete the construction of the enlightened city, and then do it, we could have one on every continent eventually. That transition can just be smooth, and then Sat Yuga can be maintained, you see. So it's so important. It's so important. And, for the price of one jet, we could build it. We could build it. So that's what we're about. That's what we're dedicated to. And I think I do have to write that novel, or bullet points at least, just to have some record of the incredible things that have happened to Mount Soma and at Mount Soma that confirm this technology works, and it's profound and it's exquisite. And Scotty, unless there's something to add, I think that's it for this week. Anything else?
No, I think you.
All right, we did it. All right. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.